Some stories don't begin with a kiss, or even with kindness. They begin on the edge of a storm. He was a mountain man who had learned to live alone, his days measured in firewood and the slow melt of snow on the roof, not in company or conversation. Then one morning, while the wind pushed down from the high ridge, he found her, a blonde woman, swinging from a beam, the cruel words, "Apache Lover," burned into her skin. It should have been the end of her story, but somehow it wasn't. He cut her down, expecting her to be gone. But she was breathing. Barely. For days she drifted between this world and the next, her skin fevered, her voice gone. He kept her alive with nothing more than goat's milk broth and the stubborn belief that maybe, just maybe, she deserved another chance. She never spoke of who hurt her, and he never asked. But the shadows outside the cabin felt closer each day, as if someone was circling, waiting. Then came the riders. They claimed she belonged to them, that she'd crossed the wrong line, shamed the wrong people, and there was no corner of the West far enough to hide her. The mountain man had no stake in her past, no reason to risk his life for a woman he'd only just met. But somewhere in the quiet nights by the fire, she had stopped being just a woman who needed saving and become the one thing he couldn't lose. And yet, the past always finds its way to the door. When the man with dust on his boots and claim in his eyes finally came, the mountain man had to decide, was she just someone he'd rescued, or the woman he was willing to fight for, no matter the cost? Because sometimes love doesn't arrive with fireworks or wedding bells. Sometimes it begins with a rescue you never meant to make, and the quiet, dangerous promise to stay, even when staying might cost you everything. Would you stay to find out what happened next? The wind on the high ridge carried the scent of pine and cold stone, the kind of air that felt older than any man's memory. Samuel Avery, a man who'd lived most of his 52 years between these mountains, knew that wind like he knew the sound of his own breath. That morning it carried something else, something human. He was coming down from the north slope with a load of split cedar when he saw her, not moving, suspended between two bare cottonwoods like a pale scrap of cloth, the rope biting into her wrists above her head, her hair the color of late summer wheat tangled in the wind. The words cut into her skin, stopped him cold. Apache Lover burned there raw and cruel. Samuel had seen cattle-branded men scarred in bar fights, but never a mark meant to erase a person and turn them into nothing but a rumor whispered in saloons. He dropped the cedar and ran. She was breathing shallow but steady. Her eyes fluttered open at his touch. No scream, no struggle. Just the faintest flinch when his calloused hands freed her wrists. She collapsed against him, the weight of someone who'd carried herself too long without rest. Her name, she whispered, was Claire Morgan, 50 years old, voice soft like someone afraid words might bruise. She didn't explain the brand. Not yet. Samuel didn't ask, not yet. He had learned that some truths couldn't be pulled out like nails from a board. They had to loosen on their own over time. He got her to his cabin before the snow started to fall, wrapped her in the quilt his late wife had sewn, and set a pot of broth on the stove. She sat near the fire, eyes fixed on the flames, hands curled into fists in her lap. There was something about the way she held herself straight-backed, despite the pain, that told Samuel she was not broken. Not entirely, but there was also the way she kept glancing toward the window, as if the world outside might come crashing in at any moment. He didn't know yet what Claire was running from or who had tied her to those trees. He only knew that the mountains had a way of keeping secrets, and that sometimes those secrets came with a pulse and a story you weren't ready to hear. Outside, the snow thickened. Inside, the firelight made the shadows dance across her face, and Samuel wondered which would last longer, her silence or the storm. She had survived something meant to erase her, but Samuel was starting to suspect it wasn't over. By the second morning, the snow had slowed, leaving the valley wrapped in a quiet that felt almost fragile. Samuel split kindling in the yard, while inside Claire moved carefully around the cabin, her steps light but deliberate. She had insisted on making breakfast biscuits, a pan of eggs, and coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in. Neither of them spoke much. It wasn't an awkward silence, more the kind that builds a small bridge between strangers, plank by plank, without hurry. After breakfast, Samuel stepped out to check the traps along the south ridge. When he returned, a figure was riding up the narrow trail from the lowlands. The rider sat tall in the saddle, wrapped in a dark oilskin coat, the horse's breath puffing white in the cold air. Claire froze when she saw him through the window, the mug in her hand tilted, spilling coffee across the table. "You know him?" Samuel asked, his voice quiet but sharp. Her eyes didn't leave the approaching rider. Once she murmured. The man dismounted with the ease of someone who belonged to the land. He was lean-weathered, with a scar that cut from his left eyebrow into the line of his jaw. When his gaze settled on Claire, there was recognition and something else, something darker. "Didn't think I'd ever see you again," he said, his tone half smirk, half warning. Samuel stepped forward, placing himself between them. "You got a reason for coming this far up the mountain?" The man's eyes flicked to Samuel. "Looking for someone. Seems I found her." Claire's hands gripped the back of the chair, knuckles white. "You didn't find me," she said evenly. "I left." Samuel caught the flicker in her voice, fear woven through defiance. He didn't know the full story yet, but he knew enough to read the space between their words. The stranger gave a slow, deliberate smile. "World's smaller than you think, and debts don't vanish just because you run uphill." Before Samuel could speak, Claire cut in. "You should go before the trail freezes over. It's a long way down." The man didn't answer. He studied her a moment longer, then swung back into the saddle. "We'll talk again," he said, turning the horse toward the ridge. When he was gone, Samuel closed the cabin door with more force than needed. "You gonna tell me who he was?" Claire shook her head. "Not yet. It's not a story you tell while the snow's still falling." Samuel didn't press. He only added more wood to the fire, but inside his chest the quiet concern had begun to harden into something sharper. The mountain had brought Claire to him, but now it seemed it had also carried her past right to their door. The days that followed settled into an uneasy rhythm. Claire kept her hands busy mending Samuel's worn shirts, sweeping the corners of the cabin, tending the pot of stew that never seemed to leave the hearth. But her eyes carried the faraway look of someone measuring every shadow. Samuel had seen that look before, in soldiers who came back from the war, with their bodies intact but their minds still out there on the battlefield. On the fourth morning, a cold wind swept down the valley, rattling the shutters. Samuel was cutting more wood when he heard the sound, a sharp crack from the tree line. Not the natural groan of ice, but the snap of a rifle report. He dropped the axe and ran. Inside, Claire stood by the window, her hands trembling. "They're watching," she said, voice low. "Who?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she sank into the chair nearest the fire, as if the weight of what she carried had finally settled on her shoulders. "It started years ago," she said slowly, "back in Arizona territory. My husband, he was not a good man. He drank, he gambled, and when there was nothing left to lose, he sold what he had left me." Samuel's jaw tightened. "They took me south across a land I didn't know. A rancher's camp near Apache country. The man I was traded to was worse, violent, proud to break what he thought belonged to him. I escaped once. But they found me. That's when they burned it into my skin. So no one would forget. So no one would want me." The words hung heavy in the room, heavier than the logs snapping in the fire. "I ran north," she continued, "worked where I could, kept my head down. But some debts don't fade, and some men make it their purpose to collect what they think they're owed." Samuel leaned against the table, arms crossed. "That man on the ridge." She nodded. "He was the one who came for me when I escaped the first time. And if he's here now, it means he thinks he can drag me back, or finish what he started." The kettle began to hiss, but neither moved to tend it. Outside, the wind picked up, moaning through the cracks like a warning. Samuel finally spoke. "If he comes again, he won't find you alone." She looked at him, searching for doubt, but found only the steady weight of his gaze. And yet in the quiet, after Claire couldn't ignore the truth pressing against her chest, she had brought danger into the life of a man who had given her shelter without asking anything in return. If the storm coming was meant for her, she didn't know if she could bear seeing Samuel caught in it too. The snow melted quicker than either of them expected. By the second week, the low trails were passable again, and with them came the scent of damp pine and the uneasy knowledge that anyone could ride up without warning. Samuel had taken to keeping his rifle within reach, leaning against the wall by the door, during meals resting against his knee when they sat on the porch in the evenings. Claire never mentioned it, but she noticed the way his eyes scanned the tree line, the way his hands stayed loose but ready. On a gray afternoon, the sound of hooves broke the stillness. Not hurried, not cautious, just deliberate. Samuel stepped down from the porch, rifle in hand. The rider emerged from the aspen grove, tall in the saddle, the same oilskin coat, the same scar slicing across his face. Afternoon, the man said, his voice too casual for the way his hand rested on the butt of his revolver. "You got no business here," Samuel replied evenly. "That's where you're wrong." The man's eyes shifted to the porch. Claire stood there, chin lifted, though her hands were tight on the railing. "She belongs to me. I belong to no one." Claire said, her voice steady but low. The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "She was paid for, mountain man, and if you don't hand her over, I'll take her back in pieces." The words snapped something in Samuel. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't take a step closer. But the steel in his tone cut cleaner than any blade. "You step one boot closer and you won't leave this mountain." The standoff stretched the air sharp with cold and something more dangerous. Then Claire did something neither man expected. She walked down the steps and stood beside Samuel. Her voice carried like the first clear note after a storm. "You marked me so the world would know your claim. But the mark doesn't mean I'm yours. It means I survived you." For a heartbeat, the man's face flickered, something like disbelief breaking through the cruelty. Then his jaw set hard again. "You'll regret this," he spat, wheeling his horse around. They watched him disappear into the trees, the sound of hoofbeats fading into the hush of the valley. Samuel exhaled slowly. "He'll be back," he said. "I know," Claire replied. "But next time I'll be ready." The weight of those words was not just defiance, it was freedom's first breath, raw and trembling, but real. That night, Claire sat by the fire, the blanket around her shoulders. Samuel poured her a mug of coffee and set it beside her. He didn't say she'd been brave. He didn't need to. The quiet between them was enough to carry the truth. She had faced the man who once owned her, but now came the harder part, believing she could own her life. The valley shifted after that day. It wasn't safer. Samuel knew the man could return any time, but something had changed in the cabin's walls. The air felt less like hiding, more like living. Claire began to hum when she cooked soft tunes from another life. Samuel found himself pausing in his work just to hear them. One evening, rain tapped against the roof like fingers on a drum. The two of them sat at the table, the lamplight making a warm circle between them. "I wasn't always afraid," Claire said suddenly, her voice more curious than defensive. "I used to ride horses bareback across the salt flats." I laughed loud. I had friends who thought I'd marry a school teacher or a blacksmith, but I married a man my father chose instead. She stared into her cup. The first time he raised his hand, I thought it was a mistake. The second time, I knew it wasn't. And the third time, her voice thin, like paper stretched too far. I stopped counting. Samuel didn't interrupt. He didn't try to fix the silence that followed. "I thought I was nothing without someone to belong to," she went on. "That's what makes a mark like this feel heavier than the skin it burns. It tells you you're property, even when you're not." She shifted in her seat. "But standing next to you, I felt the mark means something else, like proof that I came through it." Samuel looked down at his hands, calloused and scarred, missing a finger from a saw accident years ago. "I lost my wife before winter," he said. "Fever took her quick. I was angry with God for a long time. Not for taking her, though I hated that, but for leaving me behind with the kind of quiet that eats at a man's ribs." Claire's eyes softened. "That's not the same as being owned, but I think I understand." "I don't know what I'm supposed to be now," he admitted, "but I know I'm not ready to lose the sound of your voice in this place." The words landed between them like a lantern set down carefully, casting light in corners that had been dark too long. They didn't call it love, not yet. It was something gentler, something that didn't demand or promise, but simply existed, steady as the rain on the roof. In the safety of that lamplight, Claire began to believe that maybe her life could be more than surviving, but could it last if the past came back knocking? The first sign was the hawk. It circled low over the ridge at dawn, its cry sharp enough to pull Samuel from his half-sleep. He stepped onto the porch with his coffee, scanning the horizon. That's when he saw the dust. By the time the rider broke through the line of aspens, Samuel had already set his cup down and reached for the rifle. It was him, the man with the scar. This time he wasn't alone. Two others trailed behind, hard-eyed, the kind who didn't waste words. Claire appeared at the door, a wool shawl tight around her shoulders. How many, she asked quietly. 3, Samuel said, all armed. The horses slowed as they approached the yard. The scarred man dismounted, his boots sinking into the damp earth. He didn't look at Samuel first. He looked at Claire, long, slow, like he was measuring her resolve. You've had your fun, he said. Now she comes back with me. She's not going anywhere, Samuel replied, voice low but caring. The man smirked. You think you can stop me, mountain man? You've got 1 rifle. I've got 2 more men. Claire stepped down from the porch. If you take me, it won't be because I'm afraid. It will be because you've killed a good man for no reason except your pride. Is that what you want written on your grave? A flicker of something, maybe shame, crossed his face, but it was gone in an instant. You're mine, he growled. No, Samuel said. She's hers. The standoff stretched taut as a fence wire in a storm. The other 2 men shifted in their saddles, uneasy. The scarred man looked between Samuel's steady aim and Claire's unflinching eyes. Finally, he spat into the mud. Not worth it, he muttered, swinging back into the saddle. But remember, I could take you anytime I wanted. Samuel didn't lower the rifle until they were specks against the trees. Only then did Claire's knees weaken. Samuel caught her, his arms strong around her shoulders. You were shaking, he murmured. Only after, she said, her voice trembling. Not when it mattered. That night the fire burned low, but neither of them moved to douse it. The danger had passed for now, but they both knew a shadow had been lifted in more ways than one. She had stood her ground and lived to see the morning, but was this the end of his hold over her, or just the beginning of another fight? Winter came early that year. The mountains pulled on their white coats and the air turned sharp enough to bite. But inside the cabin, warmth lived in more than just the fire. The morning after the men rode away, Samuel found Claire on the porch, her breath curling into the cold air. She was watching the sun paint the peaks in pink and gold. You're not leaving? He said, not as a question, but as a knowing. She turned toward him, the faintest smile tugging at her lips. No, I'm tired of running. I'd rather freeze here beside you than be warm in a place that makes me small. He stepped closer, his boots crunching on the frost. I can't promise the world will leave you alone, but I can promise it won't touch you without going through me first. Her eyes shimmered, not with the fear he'd first seen in them, but with something steadier. I don't need you to fight for me, Samuel. I just need you to stand with me. They spent the days in quiet rhythm, splitting wood, mending fences, sharing bread at the same table. Sometimes they spoke of the past, sometimes they didn't. What mattered was the way they moved in step, like 2 branches grown toward the same light. One evening, as snow began to fall in slow, heavy flakes, Samuel pulled something from the mantel. It was a length of leather cord threaded through a small silver locket. It's nothing fancy, he said, but I want you to have it. Not to own you, but to tell you I'm glad you're here. Her fingers closed around it, and for the first time in years, Claire didn't feel marked. She felt chosen. That night they sat by the fire while the wind rattled the eaves. The world outside was cold and uncertain, but here, tucked inside the glow of the cabin, there was peace earned and shared. Sometimes love doesn't arrive with declarations or grand gestures. Sometimes it grows in the quiet, after the danger, in the simple act of staying. And for Claire and Samuel, that was more than enough. She had survived the worst of storms, and now in the calm, she chose to build something lasting. But how will their bond hold when the seasons change again? Sometimes the West isn't just a place on a map. It's a test of how far the human heart can stretch before it breaks, and how sometimes it doesn't break at all, it opens. The mountain man never planned to find her that day. She never planned to stay. And yet between danger and silence, they built something tender. Not because life suddenly became easy, but because they chose again and again to show up for each other. We all carry scars, some that the world can see, and some we hide deep inside. But this story reminds us that we are more than what's been done to us. We are the choices we make now, to be kind, to stand by someone when it would be easier to walk away, to let love find us even when we thought we were finished with it. Maybe that's what the West teaches best, that a quiet, steady hand can hold more power than any weapon, and that home is often found in the eyes of someone who stays. Friends, if this story touched you, take a moment to subscribe to None, Wild West Saga. Share it with someone who might need a little hope today. And tell me, would you want to see what happens if trouble rides back into those mountains? Or hear more stories like this, where love comes late but stays for good? I'll be here ready to tell it.